So, good evening, everyone. Madan, with your permission, I'll just give a quick overview and then we can kickstart. It's
Absolutely.
6:05. Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. So, I will just take 15 seconds because today we have a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Ravi and Madan, both of you. We know that you all work very closely together at Game and supporting the ecosystem, startups, and social entrepreneurship. But today, I think we're going to be talking about Ravi's book. And what really matters is what is the learning, what the heck, and what do we want to do with our lives? Even I want to know, man. That's so interesting to study this and learn from this. And we have some fantastic people, more than 100 people out here. So this is what's going to happen. Ravi and Madan will be having this conversation. That's number one. Number two is, for those of you ask these really nice, interesting questions, we're going to make sure that you will get a copy of Ravi's book. So because of that, there's so much of opportunity for you all to learn, get a wonderful giveaway from Thai Bangalore. Thanks to that we want to support this ecosystem. And what matters is that listening to what Ravi and Madan are talking about, ask those interesting questions. Let's have fun with this. 1 hour open networking later on. The house rules are very simple. Just keep your audio video off when this conversation is going on with Madan and Ravi so that we can all focus on what's going to happen. Avoid the networking part where you pump in all your details of LinkedIn and your websites and everything right now. Let's concentrate on the conversation, the learnings, and the knowledge. And with this, Madan, over to you. And Ravi, we are looking forward to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vijeta. Hi, good evening, Ravi. Welcome to Thai Bangalore, and it's really an honor and a delight to host you here. It also feels a little weird to be doing this formal conversation with you. We have informal chats almost every day, but I'm thinking that we'll keep this informal as well as a chat between friends in terms of your own life decisions and the learnings that we can take from here. For all of you here, thank you for joining us. It's wonderful to see so much of excitement, enthusiasm from Thai Bangalore. We also are, as Vijeta has announced, for the questions and the interactions, we have lined up 100 books to be given away, signed copies of the book by Ravi. So please keep your questions, comments on, and we'll keep it very conversational. Maybe I'll set a context with Ravi and open it up with a few questions, but our idea is in the next 20-25 minutes, we'll open it up for conversations. So keep your questions ready as well. And you can unmute at that point of time, and we open it up for audience interactions. You can unmute the audio, video, and shoot. But let's jump straight in. Ravi needs no introduction. One of the most wanted corporate executives in India, US for several years now, been on the boards of several organizations, been an entrepreneur in several MNCs, and of course now an entrepreneur at Game with UNICEF. But I'll tell you what, my first meeting with Ravi was, Ravi, I don't know if you remember, way back in 2006 when I used to run MeritTrack, I bumped into you in a flight. And Microsoft was a large customer of MeritTrack then. So I hesitatingly came to you and introduced myself and said, I'm Madan, MeritTrack. I think you had heard of MeritTrack, but I think you said hi, you were in the midst of something, but 20 minutes later, you popped into my aisle seat, and there was a seat next to me. You sat down, and we had an intense 1-hour conversation on the MeritTrack business model, what we were doing. You asked me what motivates me, why are you doing this? And then I still remember that thing that you just opened up your laptop. You said there are 5 things that I can connect you with, and tuck, 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 tuck. You wrote down an email right on the flight, marked a few people and said, talk to him. He's an entrepreneur. We can work with him, and you shot out that email. I was like saying, wow, this guy has so much of focus and the need to make a difference. And I still remember coming back to Bangalore. I think we were on a Delhi flight and narrating this story to my partners to say, this is amazing that the chairman of Microsoft spent an hour with me on the flight and talked about us. So, and I think having worked with you closely, and therefore the suggestions you made in the book for me naturally flow from that one instance. So I just want to start off with you by saying, what made you write this book? It's a very different book from your previous book.
Yeah.
Welcome, and love to get you into the conversation.
Well, first of all, as you say, while I'm thrilled to be here, it feels strange to be talking in such a structured and formal way when we have mostly intense, informal discussions. And I have no recollection of that incident you talk about. And so perhaps it's true. But I'm glad we met, and I'm glad our lives are so intertwined. Yeah. So, look, this is a question that has bothered me for many, many years. Almost every 10 years, the question pops up. And of course, the situation is different, the context is different, the answer is different. But it forces me to think about, okay, what do I want to do now? Am I still doing the things that I think are important and meaningful? Do I still feel energized or not? And somewhere along the way, I began to talk about this. And I found, lo and behold, I'm not the only one who's wrestling with this issue. Lots of people are. And I found, there was in particular some aspects of this that I talked about as I was making my transition from Microsoft to the new life that I've made for myself. And I wrote about it in Economic Times. And I don't know if you remember, anybody remembers, it was called The Fear of Being Nobody. It was like a 4 or 5 part series. And it struck a chord. More than 1 million people read it. For years afterwards, I'd be somewhere in some shop, on some plane, and somebody would come up and say, "Hey, are you Ravi Venkatesan?" Yeah, yeah. I love that article. They didn't know what else I was doing, what else. No, I love that article. It spoke to them. Then LinkedIn came up, and I started posting some of these ideas there. And again, you could see people right now are incredibly in search of these sorts of answers to these sorts of questions. And in particular, there was this one post I wrote called "Reinvent Yourself or Suffer," basically saying that old IT party is over. And it's still going strong. It's like 5 years and 2.5 million views later, it's still going strong. So I realized, look, it's probably useful to put these things into a structured form. And that's called a book. I also know, Madan, that not many people today buy and read a book. That's not how most people learn and get information. But it's still useful to do it for my own clarity. And also because then it gives you and creates an excuse to have a conversation like this one. Otherwise, it's about some little strand. But that's why I wrote the book, and we'll see how it goes.
Terrific. No, I think having read the book even before you published it and seen the early drafts, I think it's also a wonderful toolkit that you it's almost like, it looks like these are the tools that you use, and in hindsight, then put a structure to this.
Yeah, totally so. See, one of the difficulties in writing a book like this is, one, everything useful has been said before by somebody in a much better way. So in the sense, there's nothing new. Number two, each person's life in this moment is unique. So you can't give generic advice, okay? So I said, okay, what approach do I follow? First of all, the only truth I know is what I have experienced. So I'll put myself out there, with all my pluses, minuses, successes, failures, anguish. And number two, I'll say, here are a bunch of ideas. You don't have to agree with anything. Just think about these things and see what fits, and embrace it if you like it.
Yeah.
And so rather than get pedantic and preachy and give you success formulas, none of which are true, I say, here's some useful ideas. Go think about it.
Exactly. And you've been very, I think you just mentioned it, you've been very candid and honest in that book about your own journeys of your life. If you were to look back in your own journey, Ravi, if you were to just think about 2 or 3 situations where you really said, what the heck do I do with my life? What would those be for you, and why?
Yeah, well, there are many. If you live long enough, and I'm almost 60, a year away from 60, you've had many of these moments. But I'll pick a few. One of the important ones was 1996, when I made a decision to come back to India. I was working in the US. I was working for a fabulous company called Cummins Engine Company, for those of you who know it. and I was doing really well.
Mm.
I was quite young, and I was doing really well, and I decided to come back. And I remember the CEO of the company called me, okay, and he said, "Look, I think you're making a mistake. I want you to know that you're very highly regarded, and you don't have to go back to India." That time, India was nowhere. 4 years after liberalizations, and most of my friends also said this is a seriously dumb idea. But part of me was drawn by the excitement of an India that was being built, a new India that was emerging. So I want to be part of that. A tiny part of it was family, parents getting old and all that. But the reason I jumped at it was there was the opportunity to become the MD, CEO of a very large business, which was a failing joint venture between Cummins and Tata Motors. And I said at 32, if I don't take this opportunity, God knows how long I have to wait to become a big CEO. So I said, I'm going. And the reason I got the job was nobody else wanted it. Okay, who wants to go to Jamshedpur and fix something that's not doing well? So that worked out all right. Okay, so that was probably one. A second one, which was very difficult, Madan, was the decision to leave Cummins and join Microsoft in 2003. And I remember being headhunted. And first of all, I said, look, this must be a April Fool's joke, except it's not April 1. Because I wasn't even doing email at that time. That's how sort of offline I was. But then for whatever reason, they liked me and I decided this is interesting. Then I asked a bunch of people for advice. And 9 out of 9 people said, don't do it. So I asked Nandan Nilekani, who was a mentor, at that point, not yet a friend, but a mentor. He said, don't do it. This is going to end badly. He says, it's a tough company, tough culture. You don't know the industry. This is a bad idea. You've got it good out here and come in. Then I asked Sonali, my wife. She said, it's a seriously bad idea because Microsoft those days was like radioactive as Facebook is today. So it's a bad, evil company. Don't go there. My mother said, look, what's wrong with you? You've worked so hard. Enjoy the fruit here. So 9 out of 9 people I remember whose views I said, don't do it. Then I said, look, when I turned 50, which will I regret more? That you had this chance and you were fired a year later for incompetence, or that you gave it up because you were too scared. I said, let me go in and see it as a project. And it turned out to be really good. And again, I think the third really big inflection point was leaving Microsoft in 2011, which was hard. Okay. And in particular, it was hard because the only thing I knew is I don't want to be an employee. I didn't know what else I wanted to do. But I said, look, that's not a good enough reason. And I went out there and did a bunch of experiments. And, it's been a phenomenal 10, 11 years. And my main learning from this question, Madan, is about how to view risk. Okay. So in life, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Okay. So unless you take some risk, you're not going to get the reward. Okay. And every time I've taken risk, usually I've been better off, not always spectacular, but whatever. And in life, there is either risks of commission or risks of omission, right?
Yeah.
So you can take some risk and it may not work out the way you want, but then sitting out there doing nothing is not risk-free. And generally, I advise people it is better to act and be somewhat in control of the situation. And most of all, Madan, I'd see old people and their regret is a lot about they should have taken more risk. They should have been more adventurous. So I said, look, I don't want to turn old and look back and say I should have done more. Let me start doing more now. So anyway, long answer to a simple question.
Oh, it's a terrific set of reflections, Ravi. I think somewhere in your book, I remember reading that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Right? So you have
That's
to
right.
take those shots. And I think I'm connecting back to entrepreneurship now. Professor Saras Saraswati, who is the researcher on entrepreneurial thinking, that's the first principle that she says, a bird in hand. That the first principle of entrepreneurial thinking is you begin with what you have.
Yep.
Start doing some stuff and things will figure it out. I mean, it'll open it up and you'll learn. If you just sit thinking that, I don't have anything and a bird in hand is not worth two in the bush, then you'll never start, right? So that brings me to another interesting, and your experiences that you talked about. You have worked closely with some of, so if I were to ask this gang which is here, say, who do you count as the entrepreneurs that you respect? The names that will pop out are probably the guys you would have worked with very closely. Let's say a Bill Gates or an NRN, Nandan. You work closely with several of these entrepreneurs over the several years. What do you think stands out as your learnings of the entrepreneurial traits that they brought to the table?
Yeah, good question, Madan. There's a whole large section here on entrepreneurial mindset. Both of us and all of us at Game believe that this is something that everybody must have. Whether you go down an entrepreneurial path or not, to succeed in the 21st century, you need this, and it's learnable. Yeah. So there's quite a bit in one of the chapters on that. I think there are a set of qualities which all entrepreneurs have, right? So one is the ability to both see and seize opportunities. Okay, so bias for action is one. Another one is all entrepreneurs start out with almost no resources, and they don't worry about it. For them, being resourceful is more important than resources, and you bootstrap your way. I think all entrepreneurs are by nature optimistic and problem solvers. You can't be an entrepreneur at any scale if you're not both optimistic and a problem solver, and so forth. But you're right, I had the extraordinary fortune of working with some fabulous entrepreneurs, but two of the greatest of the last century, which is both NRN and Bill Gates, two very different personalities. So I said, look, what is it that differentiates great from good? Okay? Because there are a lot of these unicorns right now, and they're good entrepreneurs. But what is the difference between great and good? And I think there are two or three things which I would say. One is just intensity and force of nature. You were in Infosys and you met NRN in his prime and when he was in full flow. Okay. It is intense, like a volcano of energy. Okay. And it's the same with Bill, just completely, incredibly passionate about it and so forth. So that's one. And rarely do you find anyone who can muster up this much intensity and channel it. I can't. Okay. I think a second one that is really interesting, and Murthy used to talk about this often. He said to be a great leader, you need to have both a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view. I love that. Okay, the ability to zoom in, zoom out, be in the details when necessary, but see the big picture also. This is, I think, incredible. I would say a third thing is the ability to build really good teams. So if you think about the well-known folks who were the co-founders of Infosys, and then the first people who joined and so forth, they're all legendary names, so I don't have to go through them, but certainly Nandan, Chris, etc. It was an extraordinary team. And again, if you look at Bill, it wasn't just a solo effort. You think about the people who did it, they were just stunning. I mean, not only Balmer, Jeff Rakes, Satya was junior. So, I mean, if you imagine a team where Satya was just a junior dude, and then you had people like Charles Simoni who came up with Office, Ray Ozzie, just legends. So building a exceptional team, I think, makes a difference again between good and great. But then I want to say one more thing. So you got down to two. Now I'd say Bill was special in one more respect. He had this extraordinary ability, and we've talked about it, Madan, you and Mekin and I. He has this extraordinary ability to be challenged and fight and then say, yeah, I changed my mind. I was wrong.
Wow.
Okay.
We talked about that.
Yeah. And rarely have I seen people, and that too, when after they're successful, who's willing to pick an intellectual argument with anybody. It doesn't matter, senior, junior, the cab driver, and then get into an intense argument and then be willing to change. And in fact, I'm just going to reach up. One sec. So you've seen this, I think, in above my desk. One of the things out here is this. Can you see it? No, no?
If you just, no.
No? No? Okay, forget it.
Note.
Because of the background and all, it's not. It's a $1 bill. And it is signed, I was wrong, Bill Gates.
Wow. And I see that in your place, yeah.
Yeah, but I keep it for two reasons, Madan. One is, of course, Bill Gates, memorabilia, whatever. But also that to be incredibly successful and still be willing to say, you know, I changed my mind. Yeah, you've convinced me. And for him, the rite of passage to, you know, for anybody was about whether they could pick an argument. It didn't matter whether you were right or wrong. So I think, yeah, there's good and then there's...
Yeah, no, and also that whole ability to be open to that learning. And that with that comes humility, right?
Yeah.
To say, Ravi, to put it on a $1 note and give it to you saying I was wrong.
It's incredible.
It's an incredible amount of courage and humility to accept that.
Yeah. And he's also developing his leaders, saying, look,
exactly,
you know, pay attention. It's a symbolic action.
Exactly. And the expectation is every leader would be that way in the company.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Anyway,
we're getting to the question and answer. I know these questions can go, but I want to end with one last question, Ravi. My favorite chapter in this book was the last one where you wrote about success and happiness. And I remember several conversations you and I had on this whole purpose of life and, you know, well, there is success, failure, etc. In fact, happy to share that we are actually in the midst of a very interesting series, a 21-day series on lessons from the Bhagavad Gita, more from an entrepreneurial lens. And we're having 70, 80 people participate in a 1-hour conversation every morning. So I just want to probably ask you that I know you wrote that as the last chapter as your own reflection on the reflection of success and happiness. And I think especially for a lot of us in the midst of all the pressures that we do as an entrepreneur, I think one important question for us to pause and reflect on is, whatever I'm doing, how do I define my own measure of success and my own state of happiness? So I'd love to get you in on that question before we open it up.
Yeah, look, it was, I think, the most important chapter in the book and certainly the most difficult for me to write. And I made myself fairly vulnerable out there. But, you know, most of my life, Madan, right, from as far back as I can remember, I had an implicit theory of happiness. And the theory of happiness is you work really hard, you have many achievements, you will get rewarded and recognized for those, and that gives you happiness. And so right from childhood, you're ingrained to do this, please the teachers, get better marks, better grades, then you get the best job, then you rise through the hierarchy that way. So I went through, 40 years of my life on this treadmill of achievement leading to success. And then you reach a point where, like a drug, you need higher and higher levels of effort and achievement to get some happiness. But after a while, you realize there's no joy at all from this. So the theory of happiness breaks down. And then you have to go out and start searching for a better theory of happiness. And I have certainly spent 10, 15 years consciously searching for a better theory. And I've come to sort of 3 or 4 conclusions, if you will, which work for me. I'm not saying this is some universal truth like the Gita or anything. But for me, the most important realization has been this thing called happiness, or its opposite, which is misery, is not real. It's actually what is called, psychologists call synthetic, in the sense it is manufactured by the mind. So you will see that somebody who has every reason to be happy is miserable. Somebody who has nothing and is down and out and should be just, on the edge of suicide as joyous, like some beggar, somebody who's, had an arm amputated, lost a loved one, whatever, some catastrophe, still happy, positive. So it has very little connection to what is really going on in your life. Wow. If that is the case, then the key is to be able to dissociate from your thoughts through some form of meditative practice or something. So you not get sucked into your negative thought stream. So that's one. A second really important learning for me is if you allow the mind to dwell on you, me, myself, my happiness, my success, then it is impossible to be happy. The only times when you can actually be joyous is when you lose sight of yourself.
Correct.
And there are different ways you can do that. You can do that by being in love. You can do that by being completely absorbed in something, like building a business. It's just so intense and engrossing, you forget about yourself and your happiness. You're just busy. Or playing music or singing or whatever it is, or service, devoting yourself to somebody other than you. So when you lose yourself, there's a possibility. The third and probably the most final thing I'd say is, I talk about this interview that Irfan Khan gave. So everybody remembers Irfan from Lunchbox and other such movies. And as you know, he was stricken early and died of cancer. And then after he was diagnosed with cancer, which was known to be fatal, he was still smiling, and somebody interviewed him. And he said, look, life is under no obligation to give you what you expect. And I wrote that down in the front page of my notebook. Life is under no obligation. So a large part of the trick to happiness is acceptance and wanting what you have rather than having what you want. And so training yourself to make this shift is, I think, an incredibly important part of being happy. So I would say those are some of my learnings. I'm not sure it's applicable universally, but yeah.
No, terrific. I think these are the key lessons that we are also going through in the entrepreneurial inner journey. That it's the play of opposites and it's equanimity in that whole light of things, right? And how do you internalize that control to say that I will accept whatever life throws at me with equanimity, right? I think that's especially in an entrepreneurial journey when there are highs and lows. I still remember. In the early stages of my entrepreneurial journey, we were fired by a client for some reason which I thought was not attributable to us, and it was the lowest day of my life. But I had to, in the next hour, I was doing a radio interview, and that was my first interview, and you couldn't afford to be despondent on that radio interview. I will tell you that I spent the most agonizing 1 hour to say, I'm feeling low because I've lost 50% of the company's revenue. But I still have to go on the radio show now and act as though nothing has happened.
Yeah.
Right. And that 1 hour taught me a lot about life. That the radio show, the success is ephemeral. The failure is also ephemeral. Right. It's about what you make of that. So I think on that note, and I know we can go on and on, Ravi, we were wondering how we'll fill in 20 minutes. I think we can do this for 2 hours now. But let's open it up. I think we're getting a lot of interesting questions on the chat box. What I will request is if any one of you in the audience just put up, if you can just raise your hand, and just to make it a little more structured, I will call out the name of the person. You could unmute, turn on your video if you can, and ask the question, and we can just keep it as a...
And you could also, Madan, read the questions and pick one or two that you like and say so-and-so is asking. So that also...
We can do either of that. So let's see if we have a lot of people putting up the hand. So let's go with you, Mahesh Damoji Purapu. I hope I got it.
Thank you, Madan, for giving this opportunity. So, Ravi, one important aspect which I face challenge always is while making decisions, should I go with only data points or should I go with my conviction? And that's an area because even I started my career in Infosys, and some of the points which I always know is bring data first kind of a thing, right? Which Mr. Murthy and others taught us. So that's an area I just want to get inputs from you. Like, how do you make decisions, and how would that approach be useful for us?
Terrific. Yeah, Murthy used to say, in God we trust, all else bring data. So yeah, he was pretty tough on that. Look, I think data, evidence, rationality is incredibly important as we make decisions. But it's one part of the decision process. And then there is something called intuition or judgment. And I have always sort of probably overweighted intuition and judgment, particularly as I became older and I could see patterns more readily. But if it, of course, the evidence or data flies completely in the face of that intuition, then you need to sort of pause and think further. But I already gave you some examples of, at least in my personal decisions. I get a variety of perspectives. In fact, one of the chapters in the book talks about the importance of creating a personal board of directors, which is a virtual group. And I hear everybody's view, but then I make my own decision. And that can be quite contrary to even the majority view and so forth. So I think decision-making is a very, very complex art. And you need to, so it's not just a science, it is an art. And I have tended to blend judgment, intuition with it. And the good news is there are very few decisions that can't be reversed. Okay. So particularly as an entrepreneur, you every day you're making choices, decisions, and all that. But very, very few of them are irreversible in a consequence. So the most important thing is to get going and act. And as you move forward, as you get feedback that says your decision was actually flawed, be willing to change course. So Madan knows that one of my favorite quotes is from Deng Xiaoping, which says, cross the river by feeling your way across the stones. So for most decisions, you can actually use that approach.
Thank you, Ravi. This is pretty useful and insightful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. Kanchan, can we have you?
Hi, Ravi. This is fantastic to be in the session today with you. Congratulations for your book.
Thank you.
What the heck do I do with my life? I think this is one question we are, constantly grappling with because we're facing many challenges. And I am an entrepreneur myself, founder of Loan Genie, and Madan also mentioned, it's a roller coaster. Day in and day out, you are on a high, suddenly there's a down, and still you have to show up. And also, before I launch into my question, would like to thank TiE Bangalore for wonderful sessions like these, and also the Anta Prerna series. And by the way, we've also had a 5 a.m. series. So I want to really thank TiE Bangalore for this wonderful ecosystem that they are creating all the time. My question was, who do you think, Ravi, is a successful person?
Well, that's a really good question. Look, most of us end up, without realizing it, living by somebody else's definition of success. Okay. It's your parents' definition of success, your spouse's, or society defines what success is. And we end up consciously or unconsciously, living that life and making those choices in pursuit of that. And it's rare, very rare, that you get someone like a Steve Jobs, who's such an original person. He doesn't care what the world thinks, just goes off and does their own thing. And I think a successful person ultimately is somebody who has the courage to develop their own internal definition of success and live their life consistent with that. Okay, that to me is the ultimate success, where it comes from within rather than outside. Madan also knows that one of the quotes that I love the most is at the very end of the book. And it's by a former professor at Stanford who's passed away, called Jim March. And he, I think, has come up with what for me is the most enduring definition of success. I try to really think hard about that most days, which is he talks about how do you live a life where you walk very gently on the earth and leave the world more beautiful than you found it. So I think if every day and certainly over your lifetime, you can look back and say, I walked the earth gently and I left it more beautiful. Yeah, that's pretty damn successful.
Awesome, awesome. So absolutely beautiful to hear your answer to this particular question. It is kind of very enlightening, Ravi. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ravi,
hey, who's that kid? There's a kid out there.
Yeah, I think somebody had unmuted. Ravi, but on that note, I definitely want to read that.
Please go ahead.
Powerful paragraph that I've ever read in a long time, right? This is James D. March. He says, in the end, we are all minor blips in a cosmic story. Aspirations for importance and significance are the illusions of the ignorant. All our hopes are minor except to us. But some things matter, mostly because we choose to make them matter. What might make a difference to us is if in our tiny roles, in our brief time, we inhabit life gently, add more beauty than ugliness. I still get goosebumps when I read this. I mean, this is so beautifully put.
Yeah. And it's the essence of all different spiritual beliefs, etc., etc. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Ravi. Sumana?
Hi.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ravi, for the wonderful session, and Madan for this session. My thinking is that, in this chaotic and complex world, there is very little that you can do anything of significance all by yourself, right? You need a team around you who are similarly motivated to achieve something of significance. I mean, to make an impact. Let's not use the word achieve in light of what Madan just read out. So to be able to make any impact, a positive impact on the world, you need to build a team first, rather than venturing out and trying to do things all by yourself. So my question to Ravi is entrepreneurship really the route if you want to make a greater impact? Because you're always struggling for resources, people, money, all kinds of things, right? If there is an opportunity to partner with a larger organization and...
it's a great question. Someone, I got it. So, look, first of all, I'll quote Mother Teresa, who says, in life, there are no great things. She says there are only small things done with great devotion, and sometimes they become big things. Okay. So I think the impact happens because we, like a lens, concentrate our energies into something, and then sometimes it catches fire. Number one. Number two, there are a million paths, or not a million, there are 8 billion paths to making a difference. Each of us does it in our unique way. And so you have to answer Professor March's question, Sumana, which is, given my unique skills and gifts, given what I like and what I'm good at, what is the best way for me to express myself and make the world more beautiful? And if that is by building an enterprise that solves some problem or, serves somebody with something, fabulous. But no, if that is by singing or by cooking, because that's a unique skill you have and that gives joy to everybody, I think there's your path. And the trick in life is to not become an entrepreneur because everybody else is trying to become an entrepreneur, but to search within yourself and say, what am I uniquely good at, and what do I really love and that the world needs, and be at that intersection of that. Look, and it's very easy today to get caught up in this. So somebody asked me, have you ever failed? I said, yeah, but I don't talk about it in my resume, right? In resume, you put up all the wonderful things you have done. You don't talk about the failures. But in 2012, I was going to do a startup. I was going to build a business that provided cloud solutions to SMEs. This is 10 years ago, so cloud was early. I had my team from Microsoft, all the stars out there, and I had a fabulous investor willing to invest. Then finally, on the day we were going to go ahead, I realized I'm not passionate about this. I'm doing it just because everybody else in Bangalore is caught up in it, and I'm also joining the herd. So I think it's very important to figure out your calling, which is the whole point of this book. How do you figure out your calling?
Thank you, Ravi. That was a great answer.
So we have an interesting question coming up from Sabresan. Sabresan, a good friend from Mysore.
What's he saying?
Sabresh, yes.
This is good. Some googly, is it?
To pull your leg, this is your age.
No. Thank you, Madan and Ravi, for a very inspiring conversation. My question was that I am as a senior citizen as you are, Ravi. And during my youth, say, go back 45 years, the entrepreneurship is not that well known. When you think of entrepreneurship, the big names, the Tatas, the Birlas, kind of thing. So willy-nilly we got into jobs. But now there is an ecosystem, there is so much of startup initiative and all that. How does one reconcile? Now, if you have some passion left in you, how do you jump back into the bandwagon of entrepreneurship, assuming that you have something to offer?
Well, first of all, again, in my book, I write for people like you and I, saying there's no such thing as old. Okay. And, I give lots of examples, including our friend Subroto Bagchi and who's the other gentleman, Suta.
Yeah.
So, and what they're all doing at, fairly good age. And so age is a mindset. And I certainly can say that I view everything that has happened, everything that I've learned as preparation for what is to come next. And in a certain way, conceptually, it's true. So this was all just foundation and preparation, and the real work is now. So I think if you come at it with that mindset, anything is possible. I also have a whole chapter on mindset, Sabri, which talks about what you believe is what you achieve. And I talk about Henry Ford, who says, whether you think you can or whether you think you cannot, you're right. So I think you have to start with that mindset that you can. Okay, if you have all this doubt, hesitation and all, it's not going to go far. Having done that, you just get started and you figure out what is a reasonable starting point. You may decide to join somebody else's startup, or you may have your own idea, and you get going. And see how far you can kick that ball out. And sometimes we surprise ourselves. So, but I think it's incredibly important to never, accept this thing about old age and ability and all its constraints. One of my heroes is that old robber baron called John Rockefeller. And, I've been a trustee of Rockefeller Foundation for many years now, and you learn more about this man. And he said many wonderful things. So one thing he said is, a man must die in the saddle. Okay, it's not a gender-friendly remark, but for those days it was okay. But the point is you need to be active and engaged. The other thing which he said is even more beautiful. You should live your life so that your last check bounces.
Wow.
Okay, so forget about savings and leaving things for other people to, you do it all while you're still able to. So close the account with a slight deficit.
and if it's of any solace, Sabris, the new definition that I read recently is that 60 is the new 40. So
yeah.
Get in our friend Priya.
Yeah.
1 second.
Hey,
Hi there. Yes, I know I was muted. Ravi, it's great to see you again. You know that I'm one of the 1 million views of that famous Economic Times article, which changed so many people's perspective. on many counts, on honesty, authenticity, on vulnerability, and somewhere speaking your truth. All cliches which I normally hate, but I had to recognize as being
Thanks, Priya.
really, yeah, you know that. And I tweeted so extensively about that and saying how much it changed the way I thought, and how it just made everything so much more relatable, believable, made our lives in some ways, somewhere on par, that, we were all in the same space. But this is more of an observation than a question. But mine is, I'm a search consultant. So at the end of it, I do understand that there's a lot of issues around positioning. So when a Ravi Venkatesan speaks, everything just seems magically right, because hindsight makes everything perfect. I've heard you at IIM and some of the happenstances that you talk about. And, there's a certain sense of perfection in that. And I understand it. There is also, so somewhere I'm going to say one more thing before I ask my question, which is, sometimes is it also what you say in affirmative way about who you are or what you do, also equally important as actually feeling that success or happiness? It's how it's perceived, because the more you say it, the more you believe it. That's one. The related thing to this, and that's a question I wanted to ask, but I just want to say this. One of the things that I think I personally responded to after that article and the few other articles that you wrote about was, what do you really want in life? And one of the triggers of me moving into something of my own was being driven by my own dreams and doing the things that I loved. I love search. I love animal welfare. I love heritage. I love my city. And the one person who says, how can you do all these things together and be a search consultant? I did. And then I went on to doing that in my own business. So that's why I called it multiversal. So you had something to do with it, Ravi, in the sense of owning all my identities. Yes, you need to know that. And this is in some ways, the whole thing about being vulnerable, which I find that you're comfortable in being, very, very honest, and somewhere still being smart enough to package it into something which says, yeah, but you don't have to be an idiot when you're doing it, all of this. So my question was about the hindsight and the kind of force fit that we can do, the packaging we need. And the rest of it was just a statement. But thank you, Ravi.
You've said so much out here that I could go on and on and on, but I'll pick up two things. So this thing about success is a very complicated one, which is why I devote so much space to it. And one of the interesting things is I talk about the difference between being successful, being seen as successful, and feeling successful. They're actually three different things, and you don't have to be successful to feel successful, and vice versa. Okay. And the most important thing is that eventually you should feel successful. And for a long time, I was wildly successful, Priya, but I hadn't internalized it. I didn't, because you can always compare yourself with some Satya Nadella or somebody else and drive yourself into a tizzy. Okay. And so internalizing that is important. And that is what has taken so long. And that's what you find in the book. Okay. That there is not that much angst anymore. Mm-hmm. The second point I would want to say is this. When you write all these things, when you look at somebody's CV and all, as a search consultant, there's a certain amount of mask and varnish out there. In fact, in my last book, I call an interview as a conversation between two liars. Okay. So this is what I want. This is a story I'm telling you. It's an incomplete story. It's a partial story. It doesn't talk about all the struggles, the setbacks, the anguish, and all that what went into it. Life looks like some neat, linear sort of string of success. It's not the whole truth. The tiny sliver that you want to present to the world. Yeah. Anyway, great question. Madan, how are we doing on time, man?
We have 10 minutes and we have 5 hands raised. So let's do kind of a rapid fire.
Okay.
So I'll request each of them to keep their questions short to less than a minute, and your response can be a minute or so we can complete these 5 questions in the next 10 minutes. We have Karthik, Kitu, we have Raghavendra, who's unmuted. So Raghavendra, go for it. And Sauravil. Sorry, Raghavendra, you're on mute.
Still muted.
You to be on mute. Maybe we'll get to Karthik as you unmute. Karthik, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, Ravi. It's incredible that you said, I remember my father coming back once for all from Germany in 1992 and people telling him you did a mistake. But just echo your words. Coming to the questions, how did you shift your mind? Or if people are, for example, from corporate to startup, then to building startup ecosystem? Madan always talks about you with whatever fabulous work he does at Game, and I've seen it. And I met you sometime long back when you were, I think, chairman of Bank of Baroda and when you were at the Inc. Talks. How do you shift your mind from corporate to startup to ecosystem building? Some pointers, please. Thanks.
Yeah, so a couple of quick things. First of all, the thread that connects everything that we all do is your curiosity. Okay, so if you simply allow yourself to follow your curiosity, it'll lead down some, unpredictable paths. So certainly I couldn't have looked 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, predicted this is what I'll be doing today. And that's the beauty of life. You follow your curiosity, opportunities present themselves, and interesting things happen. The other thing I say is that every few years, particularly when you feel yourself stalling, you're plateauing, your learning is not happening, it's time to reinvent yourself. And I found myself at those moments doing a bunch of what I call micro experiments and then figuring out what my next challenge is going to be, which takes me completely outside my comfort zone. Okay. And then in that process, I reinvent myself. So again, there's a whole section in the book that talks about at least what has worked for me in terms of a toolkit. But I do think it's fairly important to, take on new challenges, crucible experiences from time to time. Next question. Yeah, Raghavendra is unmuted now.
Yeah. In India, there are thousands of young entrepreneurs are coming with the new ideas. So out of that, only 10 to 15% are successful and rest are failing to get the right support. So for that, what is your input?
Well, look, globally too, the success percentages are similar. I think 10 to 15 is actually generous. The numbers may be actually lower. And the critical thing is what several people have talked about, which is the need for startup ecosystems. An ecosystem says there are, many of the elements required to support the success that are in place. What is that? Well, the most important is there are many others on the journey. Okay, so you're not alone, lonelily trying to build whatever, the first startup. There are thousands, you're part of that herd, you're learning from each other, you're drawing encouragement from each other, and so on. Another thing would be, a whole bunch of things like access to venture capital, credit, finance of different sorts, mentors. So the beauty of a place like Bangalore is the ecosystem has matured. A lot of these things are in place. Our work in Game is trying to see how do you replicate these kinds of ecosystems in 100, 600, 700 more towns over the next decade. Yeah, so that's how the averages improve.
Perfect. Thank you. Subran, yeah. Sorry, Subran, you're back on mute again. Yes.
Yes. Am I audible right now?
Yeah.
Yes. So hi, Ravi. We are connected to the Harvard network as well. So my question to you is like what happens when your actual skill set does not really match with your aspirations? Like if you do a very honest evaluation and you see that you really want to do something, but somehow your skills may be good at something else. So how do you kind of have that balance and still follow your passion, but also kind of leverage on your core strengths? Thank you.
Wow, that's a very complicated question. So first of all, the simple answer would be go develop the relevant skills. Nothing is etched in concrete that you can't learn new things, right? So if you really want something, it's like any muscle. You go to the gym, work out, you become stronger, fitter, And so you can develop your new skills if you're really passionate. But that's going to test whether that is really your passion or you're interested in that because somebody else thinks that is what success is. Okay. So very often we aspire to something not because it's intrinsic in us, but because society says that's a good thing. And then your heart is really not in it. And then you're not willing to work with quite the same intensity, and therefore the skills will lag. So I think there is both things going on. I think you need to search inwards to make sure that what you're aspiring to is really what is authentic. But then once you've decided that's it, then it's just effort. So it's just effort. I do talk about the fact that I learned humility when I went to IIT Bombay. Okay, till then I thought I was cat's whiskers and all. And then suddenly I realized, man, there's some staggeringly bright people out there, and I'm just no match. Okay. But I was very ambitious. Okay. I wanted to be at the top. I wanted to get a scholarship and go abroad and all that. So very simple. I have to work 2 times, 3 times as hard. Okay. So I have always made up for any talent deficit by just intensity.
Thanks, Ravi. Santosh, I know we're running out of time, so we'll keep this as the last question. I know I see a few more hands. It'll be great if you can just put these questions in the chat box. Ravi, I'm taking you up for another conversation, maybe in a few months down the line. I think even the amount of interaction we've had, this definitely merits another conversation. But Santosh, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Madan, Ravi. Good conversation. So thanks for that. So my question is that, what the heck is a very difficult question. And even if you find answer, the journey is quite difficult. So I want to understand, your view and on the importance of a mentor or a coach. What roles these coaches and mentors play, because quite often I have found many people hesitant to really approach a mentor or open up to a coach, and I feel they miss out a whole lot. So your comment on the mentors and the coach and the role they play in your decision and direction and journey. Thanks.
Oh, well, I can certainly say with 100% confidence that I wouldn't be here. I couldn't have accomplished nearly, even a fraction of what I was able to if it hadn't been a whole set of angels who came in the form of mentors, gurus, all along my life. Now, the problem is you shouldn't call them mentor and go up and say, hey, Madan, will you be my mentor? Because these are busy people. Nobody wants to take on this onerous responsibility of being a mentor. But if you say, look, I'd love some advice, okay, many people will be glad to. So that's how I approached it. I didn't want to create an obligation, so many hours a year. All that is not non-start. But if you come across as sincere, wanting to learn, admiring someone for something, the chances are they're going to give you a little bit of time and be willing to help you. And I talk about the extreme importance of creating your personal board of directors, which is the equivalent of a board of a company. So this is a group of 10, 20 people of very different types who are your sounding board, who are your mentors, they are your angels. And you can turn to them every time you have an important decision to make or a challenge you're facing or whatever. And so gradually in life, I have thought about who's on that little virtual list of mine. And I would encourage everybody to do that, because life is just a whole lot easier when you have such people, and they're there. Okay, Madan, I think that was the last one. I want to say that if you can find a way to scrape all these questions and send it across, it'll be interesting. We can figure out how to put some useful things on LinkedIn or some place. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're also, for all the folks who ask questions, put comments there. You'll have your books coming your way. But Ravi, this has been a 1 hour, just flew like a minute. fascinating conversation. And as I said, this definitely merits several follow-on conversations, and we will pull you in. On that note, I want to leave you guys with a quote that really, with something that Ravi wrote in this book, and I'll leave you guys with that. I think I'm going back to my favorite chapter, Success and Happiness, and you quoted David Orr, Ravi. It says, the plain fact is that the planet does not need more successful people, but it desperately needs more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers. It needs people of moral courage willing to join the fight to make the world more habitable and humane. And these qualities have little to do with success as we have defined it. And I think that's the last few years of working with you with SVP, UNICEF, GAME, I resonate a lot with this, because a lot of our efforts today are about how do you make that small difference in the world around you, be it for entrepreneurs, young people. And in that process, you define your success by the dent that you make there. Have you left the world a little bit more beautiful than it was before? And you've been an example of that as I've known you over the last 7-8 years. So Ravi, here's wishing you more power to make the world a little bit more humane and beautiful. And look forward to many, many more interactions. Thank you for this time. And guys, this is definitely, I sat down in a session, and it's a very breezy book that you can read, absorb, and then keep coming back for framework. So maybe this should be a reading for you this weekend. We'll make sure that you get your copies of the book very soon. And on that note, Ravi, thank you so much. Any last words that you want to share with us?
No, thank you, Madan, for inviting me, for being such a beautiful interlocutor. It was so much fun. Most of all, for being a friend and partner in all the important things that we're trying to do together.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Have a good evening. Thanks to Vijayata team for getting us all together and for putting this whole show so flawlessly. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Good luck, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, Vijayata wants to take a quick video. So if anyone of us...
Yeah. So everyone can come very quickly. So that's funny also there. Ravi, Priya, we can just come on video. Let's do our best. Everyone smile. I'm just combing my hair. And but Madan, we'll do this. We'll get the questions across to you and Ravi. And yes, we must invite Ravi back, and we should figure out some other activities. I think it's been beautiful. So thank you everyone, to the audience as well. Very beautiful interaction and questions, of course.
Thank you.
Yes. Vinay, you're taking care of this, and then we can say bye to everyone. Yeah.